The morning of my brother Marcus's wedding began in a way that felt painfully familiar. My phone buzzed before I even finished my coffee, and when I saw Mom flashing across the screen, I already knew the tone of the conversation I was about to endure. I pressed accept, and sure enough, her voice came through in that mixture of forced sympathy and thinly veiled judgment she'd perfected over the years. "Emma, sweetheart," she began her words, dragging with a weight that wasn't truly concern, but something colder. "Just remember, today is about Marcus and Patricia. Try your best to dress nicely, behave yourself, and don't embarrass the family." The word embarrass dug into me the way it always did, like a needle prick in a wound that never healed. I stood there in the hotel room staring at the bridesmaid dress Patricia had chosen for me, mustard yellow, shapeless, hideous. I zipped it up anyway, feeling like a diseased banana stuffed into satin. "Yes, Mom," I murmured. I knew there was no point arguing. "And please," she added, lowering her voice, "don't bring up your job situation unless someone asks directly. Today isn't the day for complicated explanations. It's Marcus's day. We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." My job situation. That's what they called it now. Not my career, not my work, my situation, like it was a medical condition that required hushed tones and careful avoidance. I almost laughed, but the laugh caught in my throat. If only they knew the truth. The truth was, I had built Anderson Global Logistics into a $4.2 billion supply chain empire, 85,000 employees across 47 countries, exclusive contracts with nearly a third of the Fortune 500. We'd redefined cold chain logistics for pharmaceuticals, streamlined delivery algorithms for Amazon's grocery divisions, and were days away from closing the largest merger in industry history. And yet, in the eyes of my family, I was the poor daughter who worked at a grocery store. It started innocently years ago, back when I worked nights at Safeway, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand logistics from the ground up. Most executives hired consultants and studied spreadsheets. I scanned barcodes at 2 a.m. and stocked shelves until my back ached because I wanted to feel what it meant for a product to move from supplier to shelf. When relatives asked me what I did back then, I'd casually say I work in food retail, supply chain stuff. Somewhere along the line, that turned into Emma works at a grocery store, and once the story settled into the family bloodstream, there was no uprooting it. The first time I tried to correct them, Uncle Richard had patted me on the shoulder as though humoring a child. "That's wonderful, honey. Ambition at the grocery store is a good thing." When I mentioned hiring my first 100 employees, Aunt Susan nodded as though I'd been promoted to assistant manager. The narrative was set in stone. Emma, the family's simple one, stuck at the bottom rung, destined to be pitied. I gave up correcting them. It was easier, safer. Part of me was morbidly curious just how long they could maintain the delusion. The answer apparently was indefinitely. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been another gauntlet. Patricia's family was impressive, her father a construction magnate, her brother a newly minted tech millionaire, her mother a respected federal judge. They carried their success lightly, the way people do when they're secure in themselves. And then there was me sitting across the table, Marcus's sister, the grocery girl. So Patricia's brother Jason had asked during cocktails. Marcus said, "You're in food service. Do you plan to open your own restaurant?" Before I could respond, Marcus jumped in with that easy arrogance of his. "Oh no, Emma isn't really the entrepreneurial type. She works at a grocery store. Honest work, though." Jason gave a polite nod, but I caught the glance Patricia's parents exchanged. It was the look of people trying to reconcile a glaring discrepancy: how a family of lawyers and doctors had produced me. Later that evening, I overheard Patricia's mother speaking quietly to mine. "Emma seems sweet," she said carefully. "Patricia mentioned she might want Emma as a godmother someday, but given her situation, well, I suppose she wouldn't be much of a financial influence." And my mother, without missing a beat, replied, "Of course not. But Emma has a loving heart. We help her out when we can. Family takes care of family." I stood there frozen, listening to them rewrite my life into a tragedy. Financially unstable, helped out by family. I could have bought and sold every business in that room if I'd wanted. But in their story, I was the charity case, the fragile disappointment. That night, I returned to my hotel suite, ignored the champagne chilling on the marble counter, and instead buried myself in merger reports, spreadsheets, and acquisition models. The work steadied me. The work reminded me of who I really was. But this morning, pulling that revolting yellow dress over my body, the old dread returned. Family had a way of making me feel invisible no matter how brightly I burned outside their walls. Hair and makeup only added to the humiliation. Surrounded by Patricia's bridesmaids, one a pediatric surgeon, another a tech founder, the third a consulting partner, I became their curiosity. And Emma works in grocery, Patricia announced sweetly when they asked about me. She's been doing it for years now. The pediatric surgeon smiled politely. That must be stable. Very stable, I echoed, swallowing the truth that I would be in Singapore next week, finalizing a $1.8 billion merger before flying to London for board meetings. Stability wasn't my problem. Silence was. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Patricia looked radiant, my brother beaming beside her. I stood in line with the bridesmaid's bouquet trembling in my hand, listening to whispers behind me. Poor Emma, Aunt Susan said softly. That color is awful on her. Patricia should have chosen something kinder. It's not the dress, another voice replied. It's the stress. You can see the financial pressure wearing her down. I kept my smile fixed as the photographer shuffled me behind the others for composition purposes. I knew better. It was to minimize my presence, to keep the family embarrassment tucked neatly out of sight. Dinner was exquisite, though I barely tasted it. Toasts came one after another, each one a glowing celebration of someone's achievement. Doctors, entrepreneurs, partners, executives. Then came Marcus, raising his glass, his words carefully chosen. To my family, he said, sweeping the room with a proud grin. Uncle Richard, who just made partner. Cousin Derek, expanding his dental practice. And of course my sister Emma, who flew all the way from Seattle despite the expense. She works in food service, humble, honest work. And we love her for her dedication to simple values. Polite applause rippled through the ballroom. I saw the pity in their eyes. The kind of pity reserved for recovering addicts or people whose lives had collapsed. I wanted to scream, to tear the mask away. But I remained silent, tasting blood where my teeth pressed against my tongue. Later, as I stepped onto the terrace for air, I overheard Patricia's mother again, this time with Marcus. Is Emma financially stable? She asked pointedly. Patricia mentioned her as a godmother. But she's been struggling for years, hasn't she? Marcus laughed. She can barely take care of herself. Same grocery store job for years, no ambition. She's basically the family charity case. Mom even helps her with rent sometimes. I froze. Not once in my life had I asked for help. Not once had I needed it. Yet here they were, fabricating a story that painted me as weak, helpless, a burden. A few steps away, my cousin Derek was entertaining Patricia's relatives with cruel amusement. Did you see Emma's car? 15 years old. Marcus says she even uses food stamps. The laughter stung sharper than any blade. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and texted David, my head of security. Ready for pickup. 10 minutes. Helicopter fueled and waiting, he replied. I slipped my phone back into my purse and steadied my breath. Tonight the charade would end. I had planned to leave quietly, to slip away before the night shredded me further, before another toast or another whisper stripped off one more piece of my dignity. I told myself it wasn't worth it, that I had built an empire without their blessing, that I had nothing left to prove. But something inside me burned. The cruel laughter I overheard on that terrace had fanned old wounds into flames I could no longer smother. I walked back into the ballroom, keeping my head high, even though my heart pounded against my ribs like a prisoner desperate for escape. My plan was simple: gather my things, say a few quick goodbyes, and leave before anyone noticed. But fate had different ideas. Just as I reached the main table, Marcus tapped his champagne glass with the smug confidence of a man surrounded by applause. The room quieted, eyes turning toward him as he raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth, practiced. Patricia and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. We're surrounded by such accomplished, remarkable people: doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, judges, executives, examples of what ambition and hard work can achieve. His words filled the air with a false nobility. Then his gaze found mine heavy with pity masquerading as kindness. And of course, he added, we are also grateful for family who contribute in simpler, humbler ways. My sister Emma, who flew all the way from Seattle, even though I know the cost was probably hard on her budget. She works in food service, honest and humble work, and she reminds us that not everyone needs status or wealth to find dignity. A murmur of polite approval circled the room, the kind of applause that cuts deeper than jeers. Dozens of eyes turned to me with pitying warmth that felt like a noose tightening around my throat. They saw me not as a woman who had fought tooth and nail to build an empire, but as a symbol of mediocrity, someone to hold up as proof that happiness doesn't require success. For a moment, I thought I might actually collapse under the weight of it all. Then, just as Marcus lifted his glass toward me, I heard a low, commanding voice at my side. Miss Anderson. The room fell silent. A tall man in an immaculate black suit stood beside me, his presence like a sudden storm. David Martinez, former Secret Service, now my head of security. His posture radiated authority, his voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding tables. I apologize for the interruption, he continued smoothly, but we have an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention. The helicopter is ready on the roof. Your conference call with Singapore cannot be delayed. The Chin Industries merger closes Monday morning, and the Tokyo markets open in 3 hours. The board is waiting for your approval on the $1.8 billion acquisition. The sound of glass shattering echoed across marble as Marcus dropped his champagne flute. For a long moment, the room was frozen. Then whispers rippled through the guests like electricity. Helicopter board acquisition. I could see confusion painted on every face, disbelief wrestling with dawning suspicion. I stood slowly smoothing the hideous mustard dress over my hips, my pulse suddenly steady. For years I had chosen silence, but the time for hiding was over. I suppose I said, my voice calm but clear enough to carry across the ballroom, I owe you all an explanation. Every eye was on me now. My brother's face was pale, his lips parting like a man drowning, searching for air. My name, I continued, is Emma Anderson. I am the founder and CEO of Anderson Global Logistics, the largest privately held supply chain management company in North America. We operate in 47 countries. Our revenue last year was $4.2 billion. The silence was so complete I could hear the buzz of the chandeliers above us. The grocery store job Marcus mentioned. That's how I began. I worked nights at Safeway for 3 years while building my first distribution center during the day. I stocked shelves, scanned barcodes, studied inventory flows because I wanted to understand every part of this industry, not from spreadsheets but from the ground up. Today, Anderson Global employs over 85,000 people worldwide. We handle distribution for 30% of the Fortune 500. We designed the logistics models that keep Amazon's grocery division alive, and Forbes recently ranked me the 47th richest self-made woman in the country. Gasps broke the silence, sharp intakes of breath that cut through the air. My cousin Derek, the same one who'd mocked me on the terrace, looked like the blood had drained from his face. Uncle Richard blinked rapidly, his bourbon trembling in his hand. Patricia's father stared at me, as though I had materialized from a different planet. You said she worked in a grocery store," Patricia whispered to Marcus, her voice carrying in the stillness. She does," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. "She told me she worked in food retail." "I said I worked in food retail logistics," I corrected gently. "There's a difference, one you never cared to understand." Someone at the back of the room pulled out their phone. "She's on Forbes," they whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. Emma Anderson, CEO of Anderson Global. Net worth over $2 billion. The words fell like an avalanche. Murmurs rose, building into a storm of disbelief, shame, awe. Why? Marcus suddenly demanded, his face red. "Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think?" "Let you think?" I repeated, my composure sharpening into steel. "I didn't let you think anything. You assumed. You decided that because I didn't brag, I must not have achieved anything. You crafted an entire story about me, a charity case, a failure, a disappointment, without ever asking who I really was. And the worst part, you preferred that version. It made you feel superior." Patricia's father's hand trembled as he lifted his wine. This doesn't make sense. If you are so wealthy, why dress so modestly? Why drive an old car? Why live like a normal person? Because money isn't everything, I said softly. Because I thought family mattered more. I thought love and presence were worth more than bragging rights. For a moment, my voice cracked, raw emotions seeping through. But tonight showed me the truth. You never saw me as I was, only as the failure you wanted me to be. The ballroom was silent again, the weight of my words pressing down like a storm cloud. I turned to Marcus, whose mouth opened and closed as though searching for words that no longer existed. I really do have to go, I said at last, turning to David. Singapore won't wait. He gave a single respectful nod. As I moved toward the exit, the crowd parted around me. Their pity transformed into stunned silence, into shame, into something almost reverent. Every step echoed with years of swallowed humiliation now reclaimed. At the door I paused, turning back to my brother one last time. His face was crumpled, his pride unraveling before me. For what it's worth, Marcus, I said quietly, I hope you and Patricia are happy. I truly do. Just remember, love is supposed to be about accepting someone as they are, not reshaping them into what you assume they should be. And then I walked out, David at my side, leaving behind a ballroom that had finally seen me, truly seen me, for the very first time. The ballroom doors closed behind me, muffling the storm of whispers and gasps that had erupted in my wake. My heels clicked against the polished marble of the hallway as David walked half a step ahead, his posture protective, purposeful. The sudden quiet pressed into my ears after the suffocating noise of the reception, and for the first time all day I could breathe. The elevator ride to the rooftop helipad was hushed, except for the faint strains of soft jazz piped through hidden speakers. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall, the harsh mustard dress clinging awkwardly to my frame, the carefully painted makeup now shadowed with exhaustion, my eyes sharp and defiant yet haunted. For years I had trained myself to remain invisible within my family, but tonight I had been forced into the light. David held the elevator doors as they opened onto the roof. The night air rushed at me, cool and sharp, carrying the thrum of helicopter rotors slicing through the darkness. The machine waited with lights glowing against the concrete, its presence so commanding, it felt symbolic an escape not just from this night, but from decades of dismissal. Right this way, ma'am, David said, his voice raised slightly over the hum. He steadied me as I climbed aboard, fastening the headset over my hair. The pilot gave a quick salute, then guided us into the sky. Seattle's skyline glittered beneath us, towers of glass and steel piercing the night. From above, the world seemed calm, measured, orderly, so different from the chaos I had just left behind. I looked down at the Fairmont's glowing terraces. Tiny figures clustered together, gazes turned upward, watching the helicopter carry me away. A strange satisfaction settled in my chest. Let them wonder, let them whisper. For once I wasn't the family's embarrassment. The phone in my purse buzzed incessantly. Calls, messages, names flashing across the screen: Marcus, Derek, Aunt Susan, even my mother. Numbers I didn't recognize. For a moment my hand hovered, tempted to answer, but then I remembered their voices, the mocking pity, the cruel whispers about food stamps, about learning disabilities, and I turned the phone off. The silence that followed felt like freedom. David broke through my thoughts, his tone respectful but firm. Singapore call is in 40 minutes, ma'am. Do you still want to stop at the office first? I glanced down at the hideous dress, at the yellow fabric glowing under the cabin lights like some cruel joke. Yes, I said. I want to change before the call. I have a feeling photos will circulate and I'd prefer not to be immortalized in this catastrophe. David chuckled softly, a rare crack in his professional veneer. I did warn you that mustard isn't your color. Despite everything, I smiled, a real smile, one I hadn't felt in hours. The tension in my chest loosened just a little. As the city stretched beneath us, my mind drifted back, unspooling the years that had led to this moment. For so long I'd told myself it was easier to let them believe their version of me, the struggling sister, the family charity case, than to correct them. I thought I was protecting myself from conflict, sparing them the discomfort of seeing me succeed where they hadn't. I thought humility was the higher road. But humility had bled into invisibility, and invisibility had turned into erasure. I remembered the Christmas I'd missed 3 years ago. They all assumed I hadn't come because I couldn't afford the flight. In reality, I had been in Tokyo negotiating a contract that created 2,000 jobs in the US. Last year, when I couldn't make Derek's wedding, they whispered that I was working extra shifts to pay rent. The truth, I had been in Germany, opening a facility that now employed 1,500 people. My absence had been painted as failure, when in fact, it was triumph. And what had I done? Nothing. I let them believe it. I thought silence was strength. But tonight proved otherwise. Silence had been complicity. By saying nothing, I had allowed them to sculpt me into their scapegoat, their failure, their embarrassment. The helicopter dipped slightly, banking toward downtown, and my thoughts tightened into questions I wasn't sure I could answer. Would they forgive me? Would I forgive them? Did I even want to? Part of me still longed for their approval, a child's ache that hadn't dimmed with age. I wanted my mother to look at me with pride, not pity. I wanted Marcus to see me as his equal, not his burden. I wanted Derek to stop smirking when my name was mentioned. I wanted them to know me not the fiction they'd crafted, but the woman I had fought to become. And yet another part of me, the sharper, stronger part, knew better. The people who mattered would love me regardless of my bank account or my title. The ones who needed me to be small to feel tall were never worth my sacrifices. Maybe tonight was the first step toward finally choosing which voices I allowed into my life. The helicopter began its descent, the Anderson Global Tower looming ahead. The building's logo glowed against the night sky, a beacon of everything I had built, everything they refused to see. As we landed on the rooftop pad, I felt something shift deep inside me. I wasn't just arriving at the office, I was arriving at a truth I could no longer ignore. David escorted me inside past the glass walls of the executive suite into my office that overlooked the city. I slipped off the yellow dress with something like relief, as though shedding not just fabric, but the weight of their scorn. I changed into a tailored navy suit I kept there for emergencies, its sharp lines fitting like armor. I caught my reflection again this time, not a wilted bridesmaid, but the woman I really was. I settled at the long oak table where the conference screens glowed, waiting for Singapore to connect. My fingers hovered over the laptop keys as the familiar rhythm of work began to take hold. Numbers, contracts, negotiations, this was the world that knew me, the world that respected me. Here I was not invisible. Here I was indispensable. Still, even as the screens flickered to life and the voices of my global team filled the room, a part of me remained in that ballroom, standing under the chandeliers, watching pity curdle into awe. The revelation was done, irreversible, but the aftermath, that was still coming. Would my mother call again tomorrow? Would Marcus beg me to explain? Would the whispers among Patricia's family turn into shame among my own? I didn't know. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I hadn't bent myself into silence to keep them comfortable. I had spoken, and it had felt like breathing after years underwater. As the meeting began, I adjusted the headset, my face calm, my heart steady. Outside the glass walls, Seattle pulsed with life. Inside, I took my place as the leader of a company that touched millions of lives. But when the meeting ended, when the screens dimmed and the office grew quiet, I sat back in my chair staring out at the city lights. A question echoed in me, quiet but relentless. Had I gained anything by finally speaking my truth? Or had I simply lit a fire that would burn what little bridge remained between me and my family? The only answer I had was the hollow ache in my chest. The office grew quieter once the Singapore call ended the silence thick after hours of tension. The board was satisfied. The numbers lined up. Another deal closed, another victory. Yet when I leaned back in my chair, the glow of success felt muted, hollow. My chest still carried the weight of words spoken in a ballroom hours earlier, words that could never be taken back. I reached for my phone, hesitating before powering it on. Immediately, it vibrated violently in my hand, overwhelmed with notifications. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, some from people I barely knew, others from those whose voices had been absent from my life for months. Marcus, Derek, Aunt Susan, unknown numbers. And my mother, her name repeated over and over again as if she thought sheer persistence might force me to respond. For a moment, I just stared at the glowing screen. Each name carried a different flavor of betrayal. Marcus, who had stood at the head table and presented me as a symbol of mediocrity. Derek, who had laughed about food stamps like I was a punchline. My mother, who had coddled their delusions, who had helped feed the narrative of my failure until it became family scripture. My finger hovered over her name before I pressed accept. Emma. Her voice was sharp, breathless. Emma, what in God's name happened tonight? I said nothing at first, waiting. The silence stretched until she filled it. Your brother is devastated. Patricia's family is humiliated. The Whitfields are in shock. Do you have any idea what you've done? What I've done? My voice cracked with disbelief. Mother, what I did was tell the truth. For the first time in years, I told the truth. You embarrassed us, she snapped, the mask of sympathy gone. In front of Patricia's entire family, you made Marcus look like a fool. He didn't need my help for that, I said coldly. He did that on his own when he turned me into a pity project at his own wedding. She inhaled sharply. Don't you dare speak to me like that. Do you know how small you made him feel tonight? How small? The laugh that tore out of me was harsh, bitter. Mother, do you know how small you've all made me feel for years? You reduced me to a caricature. Emma, the family embarrassment. The failure who needed help paying rent. The girl too stupid to escape the grocery store. Do you even realize how cruel that was? Do you even care? Her silence was answer enough. You never asked me. I continued, the words spilling out now raw and unrestrained. Not once. You never asked what I did, where I went, why I couldn't make it to Christmas or weddings. You all just assumed. And when I tried to correct you, you laughed. You patted my shoulder like I was delusional. You wanted me small because my success made you uncomfortable. That's not true, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. It is true, I said firmly. Tonight was proof of it. You'd rather believe I was broken than accept that I had outgrown the limits you placed on me. You'd rather pity me than risk feeling inadequate beside me. There was a long pause, and when she finally spoke, her words trembled. I wanted you to be happy. My throat tightened, fury clashing with grief. No, you wanted me to be safe, predictable, manageable. You didn't want me to be me, and that's the saddest part. Because I thought family meant being seen for who you are, not forced into who they want you to be. Her voice cracked. Emma, please don't do this. Don't throw us away. I didn't throw anyone away, I whispered. You did. Every time you dismissed me, every time you smiled politely and changed the subject, every time you chose to believe a lie because the truth was inconvenient. I didn't walk away from you, Mother. You turned your back on me years ago. She tried to speak, but I ended the call before the words could land. My hand shook as I set the phone down, tears blurring my vision. I had spent years longing for her approval, bending myself into silence to avoid conflict, swallowing my truth in hopes of being loved. But love that only existed when I stayed small wasn't love at all. I walked to the window, pressing my palms against the cool glass as the city glowed below. Neon lights, car headlights, the pulse of a world that didn't know or care about my family's warped narrative. Out there, I was a CEO, a leader, a woman whose decisions rippled across continents. But in that ballroom, I had been nothing more than their disappointment in yellow satin. And I realized something then. Something sharp and painful, but liberating. I couldn't go back. Even if I wanted to, even if I craved their approval, there was no return to silence. Tonight had burned that bridge, and maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Behind me, David cleared his throat gently. He had the kind of intuition that told him when to speak and when to remain silent, but this time he chose to break it. You did the right thing, he said simply. I turned startled. What do you mean? He shrugged slightly, hands folded behind his back. I've worked for presidents, senators, billionaires. I've seen what silence does. It eats at people. Tonight you stopped being silent. That's power, Miss Anderson. More power than the billions or the helicopters. You showed them who you are. I let out a long, shaky breath. But at what cost? Sometimes the cost of truth, he said, is people who were never willing to see it. And maybe that's no loss at all. His words lingered in the quiet as I returned to my desk, but my chest still ached with the heaviness of a child's unmet longing. No amount of power or success could erase the little girl inside me, who had once just wanted her mother to be proud. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. I stared at his name, the letters blurring through my tears. My finger hovered over the screen before I set it face down on the desk. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear his excuses, his shame, his attempts to rewrite what had happened. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, letting exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night was fading, leaving only the hollow ache of old wounds split open. The city lights flickered like distant stars, and for the first time in years, I felt both utterly alone and utterly free. Morning light spilled into my office through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long streaks of gold across the oak table. I had worked until dawn, losing myself in reports numbers and plans, anything to quiet the storm inside me. But no matter how many contracts I reviewed or emails I answered, the night replayed itself in fragments. Marcus's voice announcing me as the family charity case. Derek's cruel laughter, my mother's condescension, the hush that fell over the ballroom when I spoke my truth. By 7 a.m., my phone was still buzzing with calls I had ignored. I told myself I didn't care. But when I saw Marcus's name light up again, I let my hand hover longer this time before swiping accept. His voice came through immediately, rough and tired, like he hadn't slept either. "Emma." I didn't speak, I waited. "Emma, please," he said, desperation threading through his words. "We need to talk. Last night I didn't know. None of us knew. I didn't understand." I let the silence stretch, forcing him to continue. "I swear I didn't mean to humiliate you. I thought I was being protective. I thought if people saw you as someone simple, unambitious, they'd treat you kindly. I never imagined." His voice broke. "God, Emma, why didn't you tell us?" The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed how little he had ever tried to see me. "I did tell you, Marcus," I said quietly. "Not once, but many times. I told you I was in logistics. I told you about distribution centers, about contracts, about travel. You heard me, but you chose not to listen. You nodded politely and filed me back into the role that made sense to you, the little sister who never measured up." You didn't mean to, but you did." I cut him off. "You let your fiancé's family believe I was a charity case. You repeated it, reinforced it, fed the lie until it became truth. And when I stood there last night in that hideous dress, listening to you toast every success in the room except mine, you were comfortable with it. Comfortable with me being the family's shame." He was quiet for a long moment. "I wasn't comfortable," he said finally. "I was just blind. I see that now." I closed my eyes, swallowing against the ache in my chest. Blindness isn't an excuse, Marcus. Not when it costs someone their dignity. There was a pause, and then he asked in a broken voice, "Can you forgive me?" The question hung heavy between us. Part of me wanted to say no, to let the wound fester as proof of the damage done. But another part, the weary part that still remembered us as children playing in the backyard, wanted to believe that forgiveness could rebuild what betrayal had torn down. "I don't know," I admitted. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for in the morning after a lifetime of dismissal. It's something you earn one action at a time." He exhaled shakily. "Then let me earn it. Please, I don't want to lose you, Emma." Tears blurred my vision. For so long I had craved those words, acknowledgement, apology, a crack in the wall of arrogance. But now that they had arrived, I felt only exhaustion. "Marcus, whether you lose me or not isn't up to me. It's up to you. If you want me in your life, then see me for who I am. Not who you assume me to be. Not who it's convenient for me to be. But who I actually am." "I will," he whispered. "I promise." I ended the call before I could break, setting the phone gently on the desk as sobs rose in my chest. They weren't loud, theatrical sobs, just quiet, shaking waves of grief and release. I pressed my hands to my face, letting the tears fall, each one a tiny funeral for the years I had been invisible. When the storm inside of me finally calmed, I rose from the chair and walked again to the window. The city stretched endlessly below, alive with motion, with possibility. And for the first time, I understood that my worth had never depended on my family's recognition. I had mistaken their blindness for truth, their dismissal for judgment. But the truth had always been mine to carry. I thought about my mother's last words, "Don't throw us away," and realized how deeply wrong they were. I had never thrown anyone away. I had been the one left behind, forced into the shadows of their expectations. All I had done last night was step back into the light. The sun rose higher, washing the skyline with brilliance, and I felt something shift inside me. The pain didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became a lesson, a reminder etched into bone silence protects no one. Truth may cost you comfort. It may strip away illusions, but it is the only way to be seen. I picked up my phone one last time, scrolling past the unread messages, the missed calls. I didn't answer them. Not yet. Some bridges take time to rebuild. Others are better left in ashes. For now, I would let silence be my answer. Later that afternoon, I walked into the headquarters of Anderson Global for the weekly all-hands meeting. Thousands of employees tuned in from across the world, faces glowing on screens from Singapore, London, New York. I stood at the podium, shoulders squared, voice steady. Here, there was no pity, no dismissal. Here, I was not Marcus's sister, not my mother's disappointment. Here I was, who I had always been, a leader, a builder, a woman who had carved an empire from the ground up. When the meeting ended, I lingered in the empty auditorium, the echoes of applause fading. I whispered into the silence words I wished I had said years ago. I am not invisible. I never was. And maybe, just maybe, my family had finally been forced to see it. As I walked out into the late afternoon sun, the city humming with life around me, I carried with me a lesson that I hope others might hear. Never let someone else's blindness define your vision. Never shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Never mistake their silence for truth. Because the greatest betrayal isn't when others fail to see you, it's when you begin to believe them. So if you're listening now, if my story touched something raw inside, you remember this. You do not need anyone's permission to shine. Be louder than their doubts. Be brighter than their pity. Be unapologetically, relentlessly yourself. And if your family cannot see you, then build a life so undeniable that the world cannot look away. If my story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear about your own moments of truth, your own battles to be seen. Because none of us deserve to stay invisible.